Elvis Presley's funeral was supposed to be a solemn farewell to the king of rock and roll. But what unfolded that night left even his closest friends speechless. As the chapel fell silent, an eerie beam of sunlight pierced through the stained glass, casting a perfect cross on the wall. Whispers spread of a strangely heavy casket, and behind the scenes, a chilling plan was already in motion, one that would shake the Presley family to its core. This isn't just a story about a funeral. It's about the night everything spiraled into chaos. What really happened? You won't believe it. On the morning of August 16, 1977, the world stood still. News spread like wildfire. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had died suddenly of a heart attack at just 42 years old. Radio stations cut their regular programming. Fans wept openly in the streets. From teenagers to grandparents, millions couldn't believe the legend was gone. The man who had electrified stages, broken musical boundaries, and captured hearts across generations had vanished overnight, leaving behind shock, grief, and a silence that felt deafening. As the days passed, Memphis transformed into the epicenter of global mourning. Airplanes filled with journalists, fans, and curious onlookers arrived by the hour. Cars clogged the highways into the city, while outside Graceland's iconic gates, a growing sea of flowers, candles, and handwritten letters blanketed the front lawn. People came from every corner of the world, many hoping to catch even a fleeting glimpse of the final chapter in the story of a man who had defined an era. Then on August 18th, the city came to a standstill. Around 80,000 people lined the streets, packed shoulder to shoulder, as Elvis's casket made its way from Graceland to Forest Hill Cemetery. Police struggled to control the crowds, and the atmosphere was heavy with sorrow, reverence, and something else. Something almost electric. Nobody knew it yet, but the events that would follow weren't just emotional, they were completely unexpected. What happened next would make headlines, spark rumors for decades, and haunt those who were there. On August 18, 1977, just 2 days after the king's sudden passing, the Presley family gathered for a private, emotionally charged funeral at Forest Hill Cemetery. The public spectacle of the procession had passed, but behind closed doors in the stillness of the chapel, an entirely different energy took over. No cameras, no reporters, just the soft hum of grief as those who had known Elvis best prepared to say their final goodbye. The walls of the mausoleum echoed with quiet sobs and silent prayers, a stark contrast to the chaos and cries outside the day before. Among the pallbearers was Billy Smith, Elvis's cousin, and one of the last remaining members of the original Memphis Mafia, a tight-knit group who had spent years by the star's side. Billy had seen Elvis at his best and worst, through fame, fortune, and heartbreak. Now he stood solemnly gripping the handle of the casket, helping carry the weight of a man who had once seemed larger than life. Each step felt like 1,000 pounds, not because of the casket's rumored heaviness, but because of the unbearable finality of it all. Those carrying him weren't just transporting a body, they were holding the legacy of a legend. Inside the small chapel, the atmosphere shifted. Family and close friends huddled together, their faces pale with sorrow, their hands clutched in prayer or trembling at their sides. In the midst of this intimate moment, a quiet sense of awe swept through the room. Not just because of the grief, but because of something that happened that few could explain. A moment that would later be whispered about, recounted in hushed tones, and remembered not just for its strangeness, but for what it seemed to signify. Billy Smith, Elvis Presley's cousin and lifelong confidant, remembers every second of the funeral day with vivid clarity. One moment in particular still lingers, the solemn, almost surreal act of carrying Elvis's casket up the steps of the chapel at Forest Hill Cemetery. Surrounded by the inner circle, the silence was heavy, broken only by the scuff of shoes on stone and the low murmur of grief. The weight of the casket wasn't just physical, it was emotional, symbolic, a final burden shared by those who had walked through life alongside the king. It was a moment of reverence, of heartbreak, and of quiet disbelief that Elvis was truly gone. Over the years, whispers began to surface. People said the casket had been unusually heavy, abnormally so. Some even claimed it took far more effort than it should have for seasoned men to move it. The theories multiplied, growing stranger with every retelling. Was there something more inside? Had Elvis been buried with secret artifacts, a tribute to his lavish life? Or was there some deeper mystery the family wasn't sharing? Billy eventually addressed the rumors publicly in his trademark style. Casual, lighthearted, and a little mischievous. He decided to have his whole casket lined in gold, to outdo Tut, he joked once, cracking a grin. The reference to Egypt's boy king, Tutankhamun, wasn't lost on anyone. After all, if anyone was worthy of a burial fit for a pharaoh, it was Elvis. But the punchline came quickly. "Now if you buy that," he said with a shake of the head, dismissing the story as pure fantasy. Still, the grin didn't erase the questions, because even after the joke faded, the rumors didn't. If anything, Billy's playful dismissal only deepened the intrigue. Why bring it up at all? Why mention gold of all things? Fans who had studied every detail of Elvis's life clung to the mystery. It became one of many legends woven into the fabric of that day, a rumor that refused to die, much like the man it surrounded. And whether it was truth, exaggeration, or just one more tall tale in the mythos of Elvis Presley, it left people wondering, what exactly was inside that casket? As the ceremony unfolded inside the quiet chapel, something extraordinary happened. Something that none of the mourners were prepared for. Billy's wife, Jo Smith, sat quietly alongside Linda Thompson and Patsy Presley Gamble, their hands folded, eyes misted with sorrow. And then, without warning, a shaft of sunlight broke through one of the small windows high above. The air was still, the room silent. Yet in that moment, light moved like a whisper through the space, landing on the far wall with almost divine precision. What appeared next made hearts stop and breath catch. A perfect cross, formed entirely by the sun's beam, stretched across the chapel wall. It wasn't vague or abstract. It was clear, unmistakable, as if etched there by an unseen hand. The mourners stared, unsure whether to speak or remain silent, afraid that acknowledging it might somehow make it disappear. For Jo and those beside her, it felt like more than coincidence. It felt like a sign. They later described it as strange and powerful, and the words barely seemed enough. In a moment already heavy with grief, the sight of that cross cast a feeling over the room that was hard to name. Part awe, part peace, part something else entirely. Nobody said it aloud at the time, but the sense was there. Something greater was present, watching, perhaps even guiding this farewell. It lingered in the room like a subtle perfume, impossible to see, but impossible to ignore. This haunting moment added yet another layer to the mystery of that day. It wasn't just a funeral, it was something spiritual, something otherworldly. As the family mourned, a strange sense of beauty cut through the sorrow. Was it a message? A blessing? A final curtain call from the king himself? No one could say for sure, but one thing was certain. In that brief flicker of light, something unforgettable had touched the room, and those who saw it would never forget it. In the days following the private funeral, just as the Presley family tried to retreat into quiet mourning, a new wave of unease swept through Graceland. Vernon Presley, Elvis's father, already broken by the loss of his only son, found himself suddenly thrust into a nightmare no parent should ever have to face. Behind the grieving and the prayers, something dark had begun to stir, something sinister that no one saw coming. Grief wasn't the only thing haunting the Presley family now. There was fear. Whispers reached Vernon that someone had tried to do the unthinkable. An attempt had been made to steal Elvis Presley's body. The thought alone was chilling. This wasn't a wild rumor or a cruel hoax. The threat was real, and the implications were terrifying. Elvis had barely been laid to rest, and already there were those willing to violate his grave in search of what? Fame? Money? A macabre obsession with the king's legacy? Vernon, though devastated, acted quickly and quietly, trying to protect both his son's dignity and the family's fragile peace. At the time, very few details were made public. The family and inner circle stayed silent, keeping the truth buried beneath layers of grief and discretion. But years later, those closest to Elvis would confirm the chilling reality that the attempt did happen and it changed everything. What began as a solemn goodbye was now clouded by a disturbing twist. And while the world mourned the legend lost, few knew just how close his final rest had come to being disturbed forever. In the wake of the unsettling attempt to steal Elvis Presley's body, the Presley family made a decision that would forever reshape the legacy of Graceland. The pain of losing Elvis was still raw, but now there was a deeper, more urgent fear that his resting place might never truly be safe. Vernon Presley knew something had to be done. The grave at Forest Hill, meant to be a place of peace, had become a potential target. In a move that few at the time fully understood, Vernon took swift action to protect not just his son's memory, but his physical remains. Under careful watch and with absolute discretion, the bodies of Elvis and his beloved mother Gladys were quietly exhumed and relocated. Their new resting place, the meditation garden at Graceland, just steps from the home Elvis cherished. Tucked within the estate's tranquil grounds, this serene space offered both safety and seclusion. It was more than a burial site, it was a sanctuary. There, under the shadow of trees and surrounded by the soft trickle of water, Elvis and Gladys were finally laid to rest again, this time under the watchful care of the place that meant everything to them. Over time, the meditation garden transformed. What began as a protective measure grew into a sacred destination. Fans traveled from all corners of the world to pay tribute, not just at the front gates of Graceland, but at the very place where the king and his mother now rested. Flowers appeared daily, quiet tears were shed. Graceland evolved from a famous mansion into something deeper, a public shrine layered with private grief, a space where love, loss, and legacy now live side by side. As the years passed and the Presley family endured more loss, the meditation garden at Graceland slowly became more than just a place of safety. It became a permanent home for those who had meant the most to Elvis and those he had loved most in return. After Vernon Presley passed in 1979, he was laid to rest beside his beloved wife, Gladys. Father and mother reunited in death, just as they had stood by their son in life. Vernon's resting place added a deeper emotional resonance to the garden. The man who had watched Elvis rise from humble beginnings to global fame now rested quietly beneath the same Memphis sky. Not long after, Elvis's grandmother, Minnie Mae Presley, affectionately known as Dodger, was also brought into the fold. She had lived to witness nearly the full arc of Elvis's extraordinary life, and her passing added yet another generation to the story, now engraved in stone. The Presley family plot, once created out of urgency and fear, had become something altogether more intimate, a family circle of remembrance, lovingly built into the soil of Graceland itself. But grief would strike again in ways no one expected. Decades later, in 2020, Elvis's grandson, Benjamin Keogh, the only son of Lisa Marie Presley, tragically took his own life at just 27 years old. With his quiet resemblance to Elvis and a life shadowed by the weight of legacy, Benjamin's passing stunned fans and left the family reeling. He was laid to rest in the meditation garden, close to the grandfather he never knew, but whose story echoed through his own. Then, as if history were echoing itself, Lisa Marie Presley, Elvis's only child, passed away in 2023 at just 54. Her final resting place was placed beside her son, surrounded by the very roots of her family tree. With each passing year, the garden grew not just in number, but in meaning. Graceland, once the stage for Elvis's life, had transformed into something sacred. It now stood as the resting place of multiple generations of Presleys, a space of remembrance, of legacy, and of the quiet bond that death could not break. The night of Elvis Presley's funeral was meant to be a solemn and private farewell, a final moment of stillness for a man whose life had been anything but quiet. But as the hours unfolded, the atmosphere shifted. The surreal beam of sunlight that formed a perfect cross on the chapel wall, the hushed tension among mourners, and the whispers of something darker lurking beyond the sanctuary's doors. All of it created a sense that something was not quite right. These moments weren't just emotional, they were haunting, leaving behind questions that time never fully answered. What should have been a peaceful goodbye unraveled into one of the most emotionally charged and mysterious celebrity farewells in history. Between the sacred silence of the service and the disturbing news that would soon surface, Those closest to Elvis found themselves wrapped in a web of grief, awe, and anxiety. There were no crowds inside that chapel, no flashing cameras. But somehow the intensity of that night would ripple far beyond those walls. It wasn't just about laying the king to rest. It was about guarding something far greater, his legacy, his myth, and perhaps something even more spiritual. Because as that night proved, Elvis Presley's story didn't end with his death. The strange occurrences, the emotional weight of the ceremony, and the shocking events that followed all pointed to one thing. His legend refuses to rest. Even in death, Elvis captivated the world, leaving behind a farewell not marked by closure, but by curiosity. And for those who were there, and even for those hearing the story decades later, one truth remains clear. This was no ordinary funeral. If you found this story as captivating and mysterious as we did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more untold moments and behind-the-scenes legends from music history. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you believe something deeper was at play that night? Or have you heard other theories about what really happened? Share your opinions and questions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation going. And if you know an Elvis fan who needs to hear this, share this video with them too.